Welcome to the Everybody Hates Church podcast. At the intersection of church and culture is all of us. With endless posts, opinions, and information, this podcast is the safe space to decode it all while exploring why everybody hates church. Hello and welcome to another episode of Everybody Hates Church. If you've been hanging out with us for this long, then I hope that we've added some value to some barbershop conversations about church. I am so glad that you have tuned in. I'm Dr. Bobby Manning. So excited about this conversation that we're going to have today with a brother of mine I've known for almost 20 years, and I am so grateful for his ministry and the pioneer that he is in so many different places, y'all. Y'all know who it is. I'm here with my guy, Duce, a.k.a. William Branch, a.k.a. you may know him as the ambassador from the Cross Movement, my brother. Great to see you, man. Thank you for being a part of Everybody Hates Church. Shout out to our sponsors, Life and Legacy Counselors, for making sure that we could have you here. Mr. Branch, William Branch, yes, a.k.a. the ambassador. In my opinion, it's not just my opinion, he is the pioneer, the godfather of Christian hip-hop through the Cross Movement and what you did, but also solo albums, etc. But then also today, not only is he a hip-hopper, but he's also a seminary professor. He's the assistant professor of preaching at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And so he is on the streets, on the mic, and in the classroom. And there's nobody that I know that can speak to this idea that we're going to talk about today. Today's episode is Hip-Hop Hates Church. And so we're going to talk about it, but we got something to do. Before you've never been here before, so I got to orient you. Normally, my producer, Dion, is here for this segment of the podcast called Jesus Hates Your Tweets. We're talking cliches real quick. And so here's what I need you to do. I need you to tell me, we're going to have this conversation, is this a sound word or does it sound good? Are you ready?
All right.
Let's go. All right. Here it is. You're never more safe than when you're in the will of God.
Never more safe?
Never more safe. Or the safest place in the world is in the will of God.
Wow. Now, you know what? It really, I err on the side of it sounds good.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So my instinct is that's a sound word.
Yeah.
But my boss, my seminary professor, one time said, I no longer say the safest places in the will of God, because sometimes he says I switched to the best places in the will of God, but not the safest place.
Right.
It was because of the will of God, the Lord Jesus wound up on the cross. We wouldn't say that's safe,
not
right?
Safe. Right.
All the martyrs, maybe save John, died. I mean, the apostles died as martyrs.
Yeah.
So the will of God had a lack of safety the way we count safety.
Sure.
In one sense, I know what people mean. It's a sound word, but I think on its face, it's really more, it sounds good.
Man, and I can imagine that there are so many times in my life where I felt like I was doing what God said, going down the path that God had sent me, walking in his call and walking in obedience, and came up with scars, right? Just absolute scars.
Yeah.
It's the Psalm 23. It's yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's not a safe place.
Right. Exactly.
And the line before is, no, he's leading me. Like I'm following him.
Absolutely.
And as I'm following him, I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death.
Yes.
The promise is not that I won't go through that valley.
Right.
The promise is I don't have to fear evil. The promise is I'm not alone. He's with me. The promise is I don't have to be afraid. His rod and his staff comfort me. It's so many of us, I think, we want God thinking that he will preserve us from situations where we'll need to be protected, where we'll need to be comforted, where we'll need to have his presence, right? But no, I find out who God really is.
Acts chapter 9, the man who facilitated Paul, who was called Saul at the time, the Lord said to him, go get my servant Saul. I must tell him how much he must suffer for me. So God just gave him a heads up. your life is going to be filled with suffering.
Absolutely.
Yet the suffering is producing a weight of glory. So you're absolutely right. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it's safe, quote unquote. But in the will of God is where you want to be.
Absolutely.
It's where you want. It's where you want to be.
It's the best place to be.
It's the best place.
Not always the safest place to be.
No.
I'm thinking even Romans 8. When we read Romans 8, we like verse 1. There's now therefore no condemnation.
Right.
And then we skip to like 28. Like all things work together for good. Nothing will separate me. But right in between there is those of us who are children of God must suffer with Him. That the suffering is purging. The suffering is strengthening. But there's no separation between the will of God and difficulty. Between the will of God and suffering. And so if you're looking for safety in a sense of safety from difficulty, you're not going to find that in the will of God.
There it is.
Oh, man. All right. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you for rocking with me. Jesus hates your tweets. Yes. Rock with it. Y'all let us know what you think in the comment section. If you, if what you think about that idea, where you've heard it from. I heard it in a song, in a gospel song. And look, sometimes the worst theology is in the best best music.
Right. Exactly.
Hey everybody, I'm here at Life and Legacy Counselors with my estate attorney, Miss Amy Griffin. Amy, could you tell us why it's so important for us to think generationally about our wealth?
Yes, it's about strategically planning. As the word says, that we are supposed to plan for our children's children.
Mm-hmm.
So as we are able to build, we're able to create greatness and opportunity for our children, our community to grow.
Amy is my estate attorney. She has helped me and my family think generationally about not just how much money we make now, but how we make sure that we protect our money and pass our money on to generations. Amy, how can we get in contact with you?
Easily go to our website at yourestateplanningattorney.com or call us at 855-574-8481.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Everybody Hates Church podcast family, and you reach out to Amy today. Which is a perfect segue to our conversation about hip hop and how in the tumultuous relationship between hip hop and the church. And I remember, so we met, for those of you who are wondering, how does Pastor Bobby know the ambassador or vice versa? We met on the campus of Dallas Seminary.
Yeah.
When I arrived on campus, you were almost done, and you were working on your master's thesis, which, if you know Christian hip-hop, if anybody knows Christian hip-hop, of course, that birthed a solo album that you brought out called The Thesis. Go on iTunes and listen to The Thesis. It's incredible.
Yes.
And you, it was fun to watch you really digging in the library,
Facts.
just really getting it in on this thesis, and for me to be able to kind of pick your brain, like what are you thinking about? And you were tracing the roots of hip hop.
Yeah.
And you made this argument that I thought was so strong, especially during that time where there were a lot of opponents of hip hop in the church, and that I had never heard. And you presented hip hop as a mission field.
Excellent.
And I had never thought about it like that before, you know, because we were, you know, I'm fresh, first year seminary, you take that missions 101 class, right? So I'm fresh out of missions class where they're teaching us, hey, when you are a missionary to a culture, you learn the culture, you adapt yourself to the culture, you honor the culture, you understand the redeemable parts of the culture, and then you identify also the unredeemable parts of the culture, and then you bring the gospel to it.
Excellent.
That makes so much sense to me if I'm a missionary to Zambia.
Right.
You argued, and I want you to talk about this, you argued that there are missionaries, there's necessary missionaries to hip hop.
Absolutely.
And you broke down the elements of what hip hop is, not necessarily as music, but as a culture.
Right.
Talk about it.
Man, you are killing it. I'm
just saying what you say.
I know, but I forgot it was said. You make it sound better. No, you're right. Yeah, you're right. So hip hop, of course, most people know it as music, a genre.
Right.
But we know that hip hop came on the scene and it galvanized a lot of platforms, a lot of artistic expressions. You know, you got rappers, you got break dancers, people who dance. You have the turntablists,
Yeah, the
people who do
DJ.
more than just put the needle on the record, but
Right.
they do tricks with it, and the graffiti artists. So you have all of these little platforms, and together they formed a togetherness out of which emerged a culture, a way
Right.
of doing things, products that bear the mark of our togetherness. And so hip hop produced a culture, which then produced and marked a people who were all kind of defined by their affinity for that culture. Once you had that people, they invaded cities. They were from cities, and they even moved out the suburbs. So you have hip hop type people, hip hop influenced people everywhere, but through the pipeline of rap music and through the pipeline of some of the arts, you didn't have the gospel message coming down those pipelines. So we thought that there could be someone who knew the gospel well, those who embodied the gospel well, to go to those people as though they were missionaries. To be a missionary in my mind sort of would just mean that you bear the cost of making sure that they get the gospel.
Yeah.
Because you could approach hip hop as just an artist, just commercially. It's a means of making money. That's one way. It's a legitimate way, nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
But there's another way, a missionary. A missionary doesn't say, well, how much can they afford me? And they better
Right.
put me up in a nice place. Missionaries look at a place and say, I will bear the cost. I will raise funds. I will sacrifice to make sure you get the gospel. So that's sort of like the paradox of how we approach missions toward the hip hop context. And so that's what it was all about. And sure enough, we've seen that happen. We've seen people come to know about the Lord Jesus. We can always do better. There's ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
You even get into mission drift. Where you get in there, you get on the mission field, and then you forget what you're there for.
Yeah.
But that was the goal, and yeah, man, still committed to it.
And the reality is, it's the common song. It's I Used to Love Her. It's hip hop shifts over time. It adapts to the place where it is a lot of times, and you look up and you don't recognize it because it's different. Christian hip hop has done that over the years as well. I've heard you talk about that. Just it shifts and it changes, and as cultures do, right?
Absolutely.
So as that's happened, and you were in, I believe, just kind of on a lot of the ground floors of this. Talk about how the problem a lot of times with missionaries is, you want the sending agent to be the church. You want missionaries to be connected to the local church, supported by the local church, prayed for by the local church, sent by the local church. When they come off the field for replenishment, to be received by the local church.
Amen.
That's not how hip hop, the Christian versions of hip hop, were received in its genesis. And I'm thinking back when I'm thinking early '90s. If you're talking about hip hop hitting its hitting its stride in the late '80s, Christian hip hop on the heels of that in the early '90s. I'm thinking even before Cross Movement. I'm thinking Lil Rascal and the original Gospel Gangsters, those cats. And then of course you guys, the Cross Movement coming up in the early '90s,
mid to late.
Yeah. So what was your thoughts even as you wanted to give this tool to the church as a benefit, but church still trying to figure it out. Still trying to figure out what we think about you as hip hoppers.
This is what I would say. Hip hop in its raw essence became marked more by vice than virtue. Its origin really had a respectable origin.
Sure.
The story is told that hip hop actually was birthed as an alternative to gang violence. That gang violence was taking place in a gang called the Black Spades, and he said instead of fighting with our weapons, let's use our artistic expressions in a combative type format. And that's why rap. That's what battle rap and whose name, where can you put your name, tag yourself, put your on what, on a train, on a wall, on a with the graffiti, the battle, again, step
dance
it up.
Battles.
The dance battles.
Fat Boys in it.
Right, exactly. So and so hip hop has a noble beginning, but it was also in the hands of people who socioculturally were very repressed, depressed, and so it was in the ghetto. And in the ghetto was all that was in the ghetto, and that includes people whose lives and hearts were unredeemed and unsanctified, and so the vice again began to plague hip hop. And before you know it, by the time Christian hip hop is coming, you have to tell people, I'm a rapper, but for the Lord.
Yeah, it's not that.
It's not that. It's not what you're thinking. And so you're right. So the church is all they know is the commercial understanding of rap.
Sure.
Rap as the headlines talk about rap.
Absolutely.
And that was basically a music and a culture that was fighting the power or pushing back against the mainstream because the mainstream did not embrace them nor resource them nor so that's what people knew. So when those of us that were kind of sucked into it or led by it got this idea to be missionaries to it and for it and from it, the church was supposed to be the sending and the partnering and the praying and the resourcing said, no, that's worldly, or no, that's off limits. So we had to begin to help people to understand. And so you could either get mad and, well, forget you, you don't want me, I don't want you either. Or, you know, as Paul told Timothy, he said, don't let them despise your youth. But set an example for the believers. And so for us, it was about being exemplary as men and women of God on the missional tip as a way to counter the church's suspicion. And before you know it, they were like, you get out of here with that Jesus centricity. Wait, I like it. I don't usually like it, but I like that. And before you know it, one thing led to another where people started embracing it.
Man, I think it's generational. So in my book, Gentegration, first of all, I reference you in the book, in Cross Movement in the book, because we got to understand that a lot of it, it's understanding of missiology, and thank you for contributing that. But I think it's also understanding of generational leanings and bends and how we're wired generationally. The reality is, for the baby boomer generation, there's a clear distinction. They needed a clear distinction. What's the world and what's the church? And never the twain should meet, right? What Generation X represents for us is Generation X mastered the crossover. So there's still a line, but Generation X gave us Christian versions of all the things that we saw in the world that we liked, and so whether it's Christian sports leagues or here in the DMV, it was Christian go-go's popping up. Go-go music is core to the culture here in DC, and so there'll be Christian go-go's popping up, and then of course Christian hip hop. It's hip hop, but it's a Christian version of it, and for Generation X that made perfect sense.
Facts.
For baby boomers, it was the world. Is that the world? It's worldly, and for them, hip hop was one thing. You put it in a box, you mark it hip hop, and it's clearly on the side of the line that we call worldly. And so it was so hard. It took a long time for baby boomers who were wired to think, but linearly here, that hey, this is okay. Talk to me just about the elders that just they didn't get it because for them hip hop was the world.
So in terms of the church, it depends on what kind of church a person goes to, but especially those who are under a certain kind of gospel-centered theology. Part of the gospel-centered culture was a piety movement, like looking at, like you said, staying away from the world and being about righteousness, as understood usually very reductionistically. Righteousness is don't drink, don't smoke, don't this, don't that, right? And so hip hop could have all of that and even could glorify some of it, And so, the elders did not get it because they did not want to learn it and work through. It was real, like you said, it was real cut and dry at that time.
It would be work to sift through it, right?
Work to sift through it. And we tried to help them, and that's to the next thing, because the elders, there was a disconnect that hip-hop culture did introduce a socio-cultural disconnect. So you have black baby boomers and black Gen Xers. Black Gen Xers were the first generation to come of age during post-segregation. So that's the difference, or one of the differences. Whereas the former generation was thinking about marching towards civil rights and then taking advantage of the door that's now open. The Gen Xers, to use that framework, was like, hey, we can't relate to the struggle for rights.
Right.
We're walking in them.
Yeah.
And in that, so now we're twiddling our thumbs. Like, what do we do with this freedom? Now, sure, depending on your social location, you're also burdened by the repercussions of white flight and some of these things, because as civil rights and voting rights has come, now blacks and whites on a social level are wrestling through what it means to live with this post-segregation reality. So it left a lot of ghettos bankrupt. And once you in the ghetto, and since hip hop was the native tongue of the ghetto, again, you have the generation that's saying, we don't want to fight, just learn how to work in this world and rise in this world, so leave that alone. Yeah. And so we ended up learning how to embrace it, because for us, it was native. It was the native tongue. Right. It was indigenous. And again, I personally, as a pioneer, saw God grant it to me. Because I was ready to just throw on the suit, tie, and go to church. Yeah. I was ready to do that.
I'm trying to imagine you in the suit and tie.
Every now and then, I can sometimes put on a suit, get it tapered up. But what happened was, I started sharing Christ in my regular clothes. Yeah. And the gospel was lighting people up. I said, wow. The gospel is having effect even though I look like this. Maybe if I stay like this, I'll have gospel conversations that I wouldn't have if I dressed up.
That's real.
So, and I don't think we should. No one's opposed to dressing up too. Right. Hip hop eventually matured and said, "Oh, let's change clothes." Yeah. Right. Yeah. Jay-Z, on one hand, he's got us on baggy Mitchell and Ness, some tank tops and jerseys. I had a song, all I see are jerseys and fitteds. Yeah. How come I don't see Mercy with it? Right. And but then he said, hey, don't be too stuck to realize you may want to go on a board meeting. And when you go into a board meeting, throw on a suit. And of course, now same dude.
Yeah, everybody shifts. The pipe, if Jay-Z is a Pied Piper, he sets the
absolutely
in so many ways throughout hip hop history, and I think it speaks to his influence on hip hop. Wherever he is on your GOAT list, is Jay-Z can, with one song or with one lyric, change how we look at stuff. Just it's the power of hip hop, where in 1 minute we're all riding out to T-Pain on the auto-tune. He drops Death of Auto-Tune, and now nobody wants to hear any auto-tune, and it's like
by the song's end, I'll probably start another trend.
Right.
That's what
he
said.
And he knows that it just, again, speaks to the power of hip-hop. It speaks to the power of those who wield it. Right. And it speaks to the opportunity that we have as believers if we steward it well. So and we've seen, and we can call names of those who have been culture shifters, even as Christian hip hoppers. So for me, it was you and Cross Movement, etc. For my son, it's Lecrae. My son, my son can rap Lecrae more than he know what I told him to do. And so if stewarded well, and of course, hip hop, as we were saying before, it shifts and it changes, and we all look at it. So the continuation of the conversation that we were having before, and I don't know if I want to delve into this, we might as well, is when millennials came along, it was a different perspective. So whereas baby boomers needed that line, and it was world in the church, the Gen X came and brought the crossover, or hey, we can sample that and bring it over here and redeem it. Millennials came and erased the line. and this isn't just in Christian hip hop. This is everywhere. When millennials came along, all the Christian go-go's went away. All the Christian clubs went away because millennials were like, well, millennial Christians were like, well, why don't I just take my light to the dark. And so you get
Mm-hmm.
the newer versions of Christian hip hop, where Christian hip hoppers are like, yeah, but do we have to say Jesus in every line? Do we have to does it have to be what Lampmo used to call lyrical theology? Does it have to be lyrical theology? And so there was even a internal beef in Christian hip hop. Talk to me about that. Your perspective of where that was.
Man, you killing it.
Man, look, let's talk. We might as well
We
talk
here.
about it, bro. Come on.
We here.
Yeah.
So I would have been the first to say, please trust me, next generation.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to have to have a continuity with the prior generation and yet some discontinuity.
Yeah.
I would have wanted them to believe that. I'm like, yo, I have the song that talks about would he love me when he sees my clothes, when he sees my hair. Like, you're going to be different. I understand that.
Sure.
But mission is something in particular. And that's why the question is you used to have a missional impulse. If you get rid of the missional impulse, then do you.
Yeah.
Don't try to act like you're still on mission, but then throw away the things that mission entails. Again, I think mission is something in particular. And I think the millennials felt kind of trapped. They were like, I want to drift to something different. But I don't want you to respond to what I do differently. I want you to respond to my change the way you responded to the former thing I used to do. And I thought that's where they were being a little unfair, that generation. Because I'm like, you're free to change. I'm free to change the way I respond to it, right?
Yeah.
Again, it's when a restaurant will change something on the menu and they'll say, hey, we're not doing it like that anymore. I thought it was that.
Yeah.
So I want something like, you ordered this. Yeah, because I thought it was what it was. Now that you tell me you changed it, I'm free to change my order now.
Gotcha.
You can't be mad at me. So I have a different view because the millennials tried to tell people there is no change.
Okay.
That was the beef originally. We're not changing. This is the same thing. It's just a little different. No, you've changed it, and you just need to own that. But what's happening was, so they started feeling trapped by the old.
Yeah.
And some people were like, I want the old. Comment section, like you talk about, where's the old?
Right.
I'm not giving it to you. Okay, well then I'm moving on. See, that's what's wrong with y'all. Y'all think we ought to. People are free to change. You change, they change. And what ended up happening was full circle. And that started a clash because from a father generation, me as a pioneer godfather, some of the investing in people to work out what is it going to mean in your generation to hold fast what you need to hold fast, but then let it progress and let it develop. Yeah. I just felt like there wasn't a holding fast. Even a holding fast to honoring the old generation. See, the old generation, my father's generation didn't want us, but we wanted them. The millennial generation didn't want us, but we wanted them. So I'm in this hinge. Like, wanted my father's generation, they were like, that's worldly. We don't want that. Millennials is like, y'all are old. We don't want you. So again, it's a little rough, man. But again, here we are now. Now there's Gen Z, and so now the millennials are wrestling with trying to reclaim. I don't know if you peep it, but I'm sure you do because you're up on the pulse. Now the millennials have been trying to reclaim some measure of Christ-centeredness for the Gen Z, because the Gen Z did what they did on 1,000.
Right.
So now they started saying, you know what, we're going to go back to what y'all did. And now everybody is trying to find a better blend.
I feel like it's, it was a season. It was a season of breakaway to see, just on the outside looking in, to see that it's cold out here.
Excellent.
But it was a necessary breakaway. It was going off to college. It was, getting out from mom and dad's house. To see, man, it's cold out here. I found success, and the success didn't give me what I thought it would. Okay, and now there's a reconnect and a retouch. And I think honestly, we can thank Gen Z for some of that. Just generationally, stepping outside of the hip hop talk. What we're finding in Gen Z is one of the most spiritually curious generations we've seen since baby boomers.
Excellent.
And part of it, I believe, is because whether their parents are younger Gen Xers or millennials, their parents are the parents that say, "Oh, I'm not going to make you go to church." And so now the Gen Z is looking around like, I don't have a spiritual foundation. Let me find one.
Excellent.
And some of them are coming back to the church. Others are going into New Age and doing different things. But you're finding that Gen Z is a spiritually curious generation. And I think we're positioned in the church and in hip hop and in Christian hip hop to really influence this generation to really be an even better version of what we fought over for a while. And so it's interesting, bro. It's super interesting.
Excellent.
Let me, if we wasn't already into some dangerous territory, let me let me talk about
deeper.
Let me talk about hip hop. And for a while, because I'm assuming and maybe even hypothesizing that because hip hop and Christian hip hop didn't find a home in the church, how did you find hip hop trying to replace or even become church-like for Christian hip hoppers who, or just hip hoppers who were inclined to the music? I feel like there was a homelessness that Christian hip hop had, so a feeling like a record label had to become the church. Talk to me about that. What are your thoughts?
You said in hip hop or in Christian hip hop?
Really in Christian hip hop. So even in your experience, where we talk about things like accountability, discipleship, church discipline. How much of that did the label feel like they had to do because there wasn't a home in the church?
Excellent. So let me answer that question by just reminding listeners, the Protestant Reformation was a breaking away from the Catholic Church. The word Catholic really means universal.
Right.
Most people, when they think Catholic Church, they think Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
But the word Catholic means universal. It was a way to make sure that the church was unified. The Protestant Reformation, when it broke free, wanted to unify the church around a sound gospel doctrine. But part of that was the inventing of the printing press, which allowed copies of the Bible to be dispersed rather than you having to come where it's like there's one Bible and we all rallied to hear that one Bible. That kept the unity. And the Protestant church began to help there to be churches that weren't tied to the hierarchy in Rome. What that did was the gift was freedom to gospel purity. The downside of it was it started a individualism that did not exist before. And we're still battling with that today. It's me and God, my personal religion, me and my Bible under a tree. I don't need y'all, which is not true, but that's the way you're able to
biblical.
live. It's not biblical. But sounds good, not sound word.
There you go.
So, but in like manner, because of the when the church did not resource, give home, birth, nurture the Christian missional hip hopper, people had to learn how to, it's me and Jesus and whosoever will. So it wasn't church, it was believers out in the out and about. So labels then are like, listen, we're not a church, but we can still have all the things you normally go to church for. Because after all, we got the Holy Spirit too. And that's a truth. But that doesn't replace church.
Absolutely.
But they were like, but if the church, I think they eventually, and they say a mist in the pulpit is a fog in the pew.
Come on, Howard Hendricks. Come on, man.
So after I think what happened was, one person probably said, let's just be a supplement for the lack of church. A new generation is like, let's just kind of be your church. Next thing you know, it's like, after all, we are the church.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
And we don't know how far we've drifted.
Right. We don't know how far we drifted.
Yeah.
And which is why now, post-pandemic, people are trying to figure out church because they're like, I even see for 2 years or however many years it was, we found another way.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing. The labels tried to, I think they drifted to being an alternative when one time they just were trying to be a supplement. And before you know it, they started replacing. But a lot of life started impacting. I'm going to say something that Dr. Tony Evans said. He said, people say, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And he says, you're absolutely right. Salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. He said, but you also don't have to go home to be married. He said, but stay away long enough and watch how it adversely affects your marriage.
Relationship.
So it's the same thing. It's like, you don't have to go to church to be saved. But without God's mechanism known as the church, without God's means of grace as the church, watch your spirituality take a hit. And we saw that, which is why we're seeing it now. Mental depression, mental illness, people feel unstable. Gen Z, they say, are more depressed than anybody, more talented, more this, more curious, but also more depressed.
Absolutely.
And
more mental and emotional issues.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so what pops up and has popped up in your story, and however much of it you want to tell, but even we've seen recently in a previous episode we talked about something that happened recently with the guy Dante Bowie. And there's we see that publicly there's a question and then there's a statement. We have to distance ourselves from this person, and I'm an observer from afar, but I'm also saying, man, okay, if there isn't restoration here, is there restoration anywhere? And how much responsibility does a music label have to be the church for an individual? The scripture teaches, if anyone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one with the spirit of meekness and gentleness. Do we toss that ball back to the church? Did the ministry and the outward facing music replace accountability to, I'm on tour every weekend. How can I be connected to a local church? Am I connected to a local church? And I don't know what that story is for somebody like Dwayne Bowie, but I'm interested in, as a pastor, I'm interested in those who are gifted musicians who do worship music vocationally and don't have the opportunity to do the same discipline as part of a biblical church community. How do you, let me bring this back to you. How do you, even as still an artist, make sure that the art doesn't replace the community?
What I can say is, and I don't do it to the same extent, so it's a little easier when the opportunities are not coming fast and furious. But even when I go back to when it was coming fast and furious, we live our theology. We live our convictions. There's a movie back in the days, Chariots of Fire. Chariots of Fire is the story of a man who was so committed to the Sabbath that he wouldn't compete on the Sabbath, and he stuck to his convictions, of course, and the story is told that he was able through his convictions to run, and he won. So the idea here is, what are you willing to sacrifice to maintain that which is most important? And so I think that we have to sacrifice, and that's when you got to be. You have to care. You have to have a strong ecclesiology. So I spent a lot of my time on the evangelist tip, and so there was less of an emphasis on the local church expression, more of a let's go and leave the church and wave the aroma. But in going out, I started running across people who were like, man, how did you become like you? Like, did you become like you because you just were running into spiritual stuff on the fly? And I had to say, no, the church being grounded and rooted and poured into and immersed in the local church faithfulness produced me. maybe we need to start thinking about how you're going to be produced. Because right now we help you by waving the aroma evangelistically, but what ecclesially, what from a church standpoint.
Right.
So I joined the chorus of people who said, let's join churches, strengthen churches, if need be, plant churches that will take people from spiritual infancy to spiritual maturity. So for me, it's the way that art doesn't replace it is your theology of I'm missional. Again, the art will replace it. If you say, I'm an artist, okay, let me give you another one. Language.
Yeah.
I think the language shifted. So back in the days, you would say stuff like, yeah, man, because we're going to do this ministry. Ministry makes you think something, right? Again, we started using the word missionally. Yeah, man, because I'm doing rap missionally. Language makes you think something. One day, people no longer wanted to be constrained by the profile of or the portrait of mission or ministry. Ministry sounded too religious. So they wanted to go to a word equally true, but the connotation is different, artistry. We used to say industry versus ministry. And that's because those two do have different bottom lines.
Absolutely.
And artistry is basically the art is the center.
Okay.
Mission or industry says the mission is central. Ministry says ministry is the product. When people went to artistry, I think what they did subconsciously, maybe unbeknownst to them, was they centered the art as the center. Which again, it's not a sin. It's just different than when the mission, because we just talked about the safest place versus the best place. If you want safety, you may not want to go to the mission field. If you want the best place, God, you want me to go to the mission field? Okay. Again, so it's that tension. So the tension is artistry. I'm an artist. I live by art rules. And art rules are different than mission rules because the mission rules have been given to us. You don't come up with them. You have to submit to them. Artistry, you use you.
So let me push back a little bit,
Amen.
Duce. I want to see what you think about this.
Get busy.
Because I watched the lyrical theology era of Christian hip hop become a crutch.
Right. I understand.
I watched it fall, and I watched so many people fall.
I understand.
And the reason I think was the lyricism was so bibliocentric, which I mean I'm not decrying that,
right?
But it was so strong that the consumer started to say stuff like, "Man, I'm learning more from listening to Lamp Mode than I am at church on Sunday."
Right.
And it became a replacement.
Okay, I got you.
And so now, when I'll keep it generationally. When millennials get a hold of it and say, you know what, it doesn't have to be this, then the whole thing crumbles on itself. Not necessarily because it's their fault, these darn millennials. Maybe it's all of our fault for thinking that the music could replace the church. It's what I find myself saying as a pastor post-pandemic, that content consumption is not a replacement for Christian community.
Excellent.
And what I remember as somebody who was fully engaged in Christian hip hop, I got to tell you the story of my first day on the campus of Dallas Seminary. I was fully in on Christian hip hop. I saw people pull from the church because we saw less value in my pastor's Sunday sermon because I ate off of. It's something I said in a sermon a few weeks ago. I said, look, at my grandmother's house, there's growing up, there was a bowl in the middle of the table with wax fruit in it. And just because it was in the middle of the table where we would normally eat food, and just because it looked like food, doesn't mean it was food to be consumed. It was to be observed. So many of us treat music like it's food to be consumed rather than art to be observed. And I think whether it's whatever kind of hip hop it is, we got to be careful when we start consuming it as food and using it to replace what really should be our nourishment. And so I'm worried cross-generationally about an art form that replaces the church, and we saw it crumble. We saw it completely crumble, and then when it crumbled, everybody. I'm watching. I'm watching you. I'm at legacy. Like, oh shoot, right? Because there's what's happening on stage, and then there's what's happening in the hallway. And I saw everybody pointing fingers. Probably some of it rightfully so, and yet at the same time, I'm wondering: is it anybody's fault? Or is it that we expected too much of the music?
Excellent. I think that's a great analysis. I would say that whatever is the answer to that question, there's a more fundamental problem of why that question led to an implosion rather than just a calibration. And that is, multiple things happened. The replacement that should never have happened. At the same time, everything, technology, media, all of these things started speeding everything up. You know, it'd be like a conveyor belt, and you're like, you know, like wait, like now, because so when the conveyor belt was moving at a pace I could handle, I could even see, oh, we about to switch up. Hey, we get ready to do bigger things. Come on, put that over the side. All right, but if it's coming at a pace where you can't, eventually you start dropping packages, and before you know it, you're like, stop it, we're messing up. And what happened was, we started speeding up, and we weren't able to adjust to shifts. We weren't able to say what you said and say, oh, pause, stop it. We have to shift. I see a replacement, and it's not supposed to be. But people had no incentive to stop because they were like, the getting was good. Keep going. So, yes, you're right. But I think we were supposed to stay together long enough, stay committed to the mission, which, if it would have been central, to pause mission drift or shifts or work through some of the things so that we could learn. Hold on. Lyrical theology, boom. Hold on. Gospel centered, boom. Hold on. Some people want some different things. We were supposed to like meet and work through issues. But instead, what we did was everybody just said, skip the unification.
I'm just going to
do my thing. And now we've got a world of my things. But the common, like the thread that kept us all together faded. And
so what I would say to that, and I agree, is probably more less than anybody's fault. It's probably as much the missing necessary component in the whole process, which is the church. Because somebody probably needed somebody to say, and it wasn't y'all's job, I don't think, to say it, but somebody needed somebody to say, yo, Shylin is not your pastor. Ambassador is not your pastor. So that when I'll throw a Lecrae or a KB. So that when Lecrae comes and says, "Hey, y'all, I'm not your pastor." Nobody has a meltdown and says, "Wait a minute, but they were."
But you've been my.
You were supposed to be like nobody was ever supposed to be, and so the necessary fusion of the art or the mission and the missionary with the local church, I think, was so important. That and it's something that I think we missed maybe during that time. My prayer is that there's today a reconnection and a reemergence. Now that that many of the pastors are now Gen Xers and up and coming millennials. Now there's no longer that's the world. Now it's a reception, an acceptance, and a mobilizing, hopefully, of the art, and so that the art can be the mission, and that the artists can be missionaries, and in partnership with churches, we can say, all right, this is a tool but that person does not deserve a pedestal,
Right.
which is the natural occurrence in hip hop outside of Christ.
Right.
Is you put the
Right.
person on the pedestal. You
Right.
pedestalize the artist.
Right.
Now it's hopefully you know what? Let's not pedestalize the artist. Let's put them in a place where they can let this light shine, and then we can glorify our Father who is in heaven. And
Amen.
now, and that's a message,
Amen.
bro. Outside of hip hop,
Yeah.
we just need to get to Christians. Period.
Right. Right.
That whether it's a charismatic preacher or an artist or whoever, the goal is for all of us to be pointing to Jesus and leveraging the foundation of what we do, which is the local church. Unfortunately, we have received the trinkets of the church without loving the foundation of the church, and we need to flip that. The art is a trinket of the church. The YouTube sermon is a trinket of the church. Hopefully we can get to a point, whether you're a hip hopper or not, where we can just get us back to a place where we love the church.
Right, right. Because to love Christ is to love His bride. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so absolutely. Again, the journey. It's a journey, and our faith. Again, over 2,000 years of ebbs and flows and pivot points and inflection points and shifts and drifts and revivals, and so. This was no different.
Yeah.
It was going to have some wobbles. It's going to need to be revived, and God is faithful. So to whatever degree it's useful in the Master's hands, He will prune it that it will bear more fruit.
Love it.
Right?
Absolutely. You recently, just last year, dropped some new music.
Right,
why
right,
did
right,
you
right.
do that? Why do we need some new heat from Amber?
Right.
What
Well,
was the
one,
thought
it
behind
was really just because it still is a native tongue. It's still a way to say things. And two, you know what ended up happening? I did a 16 out of the blue, and more people viewed that than views when I wax eloquent for 7 minutes of just, 10 minutes, 20 minutes of opening the Bible and talking. And I said, man, this little nugget, which is not meant to replace the more elaborate exposition, this nugget will drop into someone's space quicker and probably more numerous, more how do I want to put it? More people will tune in to taking that nugget.
Absolutely.
And so I said, you know what? It's a native tongue. I still can do. I don't sound like you. Sound like you should stop. Like when people hear me, they don't say like you sound like that old dude who doesn't want to let it go. No, they say you still got it. Right? So not that it was my greatest work, but it still was you still do it. You still have it. Yeah. Hip hop, generally speaking, its old elder statesmen are still going. Gotcha. Again, Jay-Z is 53, 52, 53. 53. And we're talking, and Nas knocking on 50's door. So that Gen Xer still raps. Yeah. Again, and so I still had it, and I'm still doing it, and I got much more that I want to put out. Dope. Because it's just another way, and plus it was another way to register where I am in this moment. So out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I just wanted what was in my heart to be heard through those rhymes, so people say, oh, he's not on what everybody else is on. And I want to pique their interest, because I do think it's time to call people toward, because it's called the invitation. Like, I hadn't heard anyone inviting anyone in. Everyone's leaving. Everyone is changing what they believed. Everyone is leaving where they were. I didn't hear people saying, I'm inviting you not into where I am now. I'm inviting you into what made me what I am now. Because again, people are what they are because they were where they were. Sure. And God used it. Sure. Now again, sometimes God uses it despite, but I think it's because of, like you said, because the church I have the story of, I was grounded in a community of faith. And so let's invite people back. So I wanted to look to the world and say, you're invited to come back. Love it. Come back to Christ. He's at the head of the table. And so,
Good stuff. Well, man, I appreciate it. I think it speaks to once again, the power of the tool of hip hop. And whatever tools that God has given you, you're a great example of this, Duce, that God gave you a tool and you used it as a missional leverage to reach people. And this is what God designed the church for us to find the gifts, for us to find the unique gifts that he gave to people, and then teach them how to use those gifts to glorify God, to bring glory to his name, and draw people to himself. So whatever gifts you have, if you're listening, if you're watching, whatever gift you have, you may not be able to rhyme. I definitely can't. But whatever gift God gave you, God gave it to you in order to bring him glory and to draw people to his presence. And I pray that the church, the local church, will be a great foundation, a launch pad, a helipad for you, that you can launch your gift into the world to show forth the glory of Jesus. That's what you've modeled for us. Thank you for modeling that for us, bro. And I'm grateful, man, for our friendship. Thank you for being a part of Everybody Hates Church in this episode. Hey, y'all, if you enjoyed this, make sure that you hit like, comment, share, however you're consuming this. I hope that you'll let us know that you enjoyed it. If you have feedback, make sure you drop it in the comment section and let somebody know that you enjoyed Everybody Hates Church. We'll see you next time. We'll be right back. We got another episode coming. Just stay tuned. Make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss any episode, any of the content from Everybody Hates Church. Hit us on Instagram at Everybody Hates Church, on TikTok at Everybody Hates Church. Follow us on YouTube. Just find us. We here. We out here. Catch us. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for being with us.